The morning I realized my bank account was empty, I didn't scream. I just sat very still, holding my coffee like it might spill the truth if I set it down. At 72, you learn the difference between panic and knowing. Panic is loud. Knowing is quiet. And that morning, in my small kitchen with the curtains half open, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. I had always been careful with money. Not stingy, careful. Every dollar had a memory attached to it. The extra shift I picked up after my husband passed. The years I skipped vacations so my son Daniel could go to college without loans. The savings I tucked away just in case, because life has a way of testing women who think love alone is enough. Daniel had my banking access for emergencies. That was my first mistake. "Well, Mom," he'd said once, smiling like the little boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street. What could possibly happen? That question echoed in my head as I stared at the screen. Balance, $0. I refreshed it. Once, twice, 3 times, as if the numbers might apologize and correct themselves. They didn't. My hands shook not from fear, but from a strange sense of betrayal that felt too heavy for tears. I checked the transaction history. Transfers, withdrawals, airline charges, a hotel resort I'd never heard of, a cruise booking, all done within 48 hours. And then I saw it. A selfie posted online. Daniel, his wife, Leela, and her mother smiling wide under palm trees, drinks raised, sunglasses tilted just so. The caption read, "Family trip. We deserved this, deserved." I laughed then. A small, broken laugh that surprised even me. For years, I had told myself that being a good mother meant being understanding. That love meant forgiving before being asked. That if I just stayed quiet, things would work themselves out. I remembered Leela's voice from months earlier, sharp but sweet on the surface. "You don't really need all that money, do you?" she'd said, stirring her coffee. "I mean, you already lived your life." I didn't answer then. I smiled. I always smiled. That afternoon, I called Daniel. Straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. Instead, I went for a walk slowly, carefully past the houses I'd watched rise from dirt into homes, past neighbors who waved, unaware that something inside me had finally cracked open. I wasn't angry yet. I was thinking. Because here's the thing people forget about women my age. We've survived loss, hunger, silence, and sacrifice. We don't rush, and we don't act without purpose. That night, as I sat alone at my dining table, I made a decision not out of revenge, but out of clarity. 3 days later, my phone would ring, and my son would be crying. But before that, I had something important to do. The house felt different once I made my decision quieter, but not lonely. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when the air settles and everything smells like truth. I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I didn't call the bank right away. That might surprise you. Most people would rush to fix things, to undo the damage as fast as possible. But I had spent a lifetime cleaning up after other people's messes. This time, I needed to understand the full shape of what had been taken from me. I made oatmeal and ate it slowly, just like my husband used to. Then I pulled out the old leather folder from the hall drawer. The one Daniel once joked was Mom's secret vault. Inside were documents most people forget exist once they trust their children too much. Power of attorney, joint access forms, emergency authorizations. I read every page carefully, my finger tracing the fine print like a map. And there it was clear as day. Daniel hadn't stolen from me in the legal sense. He had used what I'd given him. That realization stung more than the empty account. Around noon, my neighbor Ruth knocked on my door. She's younger than me by a decade and sharper than most lawyers I've met. She took one look at my face and said, "Sit down. Tell me everything." So I did. Ruth didn't interrupt. She just listened, nodding slowly, her jaw tightening when I mentioned Leela's mother tagging along. When I finished, she leaned back and crossed her arms. "Well," she said, "they think you're powerless." That word powerless lit something inside me. I had raised Daniel on my own after his father died, taught him right from wrong, paid for braces, lessons, heartbreaks. I had power then, even when I didn't feel like it. And I still did now. Ruth helped me make a list, not of revenge, but of options. First, she said, protect yourself. Second, let consequences do the talking. That afternoon, I finally called the bank, not to demand my money back, but to ask questions. Calm ones. Specific ones. The kind that make people on the other end of the line sit up straighter. By evening, I had new account numbers, new access rules, and one very important confirmation. Everything Daniel had taken could be traced. I didn't block him, not yet. I wanted him to enjoy his vacation. I wanted the sun to warm his face. I wanted him to feel safe, because that's when people reveal who they truly are. That night, I sat on my bed and looked at an old photo of Daniel at 7 years old, missing a tooth, holding up a paper airplane he'd made from one of my bills. I'd laughed then, told him money comes and goes, character stays. I wondered if he remembered that. 3 days later, while I was watering my plants, my phone finally rang. Daniel's name lit up the screen. And this time I answered. I answered the phone on the third ring, not because I was eager, but because timing matters when someone is about to learn a lesson. "Mom," Daniel's voice cracked the moment I said hello. "What did you do?" I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching sunlight catch the dust in the air. "Good morning to you too," I said gently. There was shouting in the background. Laughter, too, not the happy kind. The kind that comes from strangers who don't care that your world is tilting sideways. "We're at a restaurant," he whispered urgently. "My cards aren't working. None of them. Even the hotel tried to charge us this morning. And Mom, people are staring." I closed my eyes, not in satisfaction, in sadness. I see, I said. Have you tried paying with the money you left me? There was a long pause, then Leela's voice, sharp, impatient. Why is she being dramatic? Just fix it. Daniel covered the phone. He came back sounding smaller. Mom, please. This isn't funny. We're stuck. I thought of all the times I had been stuck, working double shifts while he slept, sitting alone in hospital waiting rooms, smiling through worry so he wouldn't feel it. I didn't touch your trip, I said calmly. I just protected what was left of my life. He exhaled hard. You embarrassed us. That word again, embarrassed. I looked at my hands. These hands had rocked him to sleep. Written checks. Cleaned messes no one thanked me for. Daniel, I said softly, you emptied my account without asking. You took my security, my dignity, my future. And you're worried about a lunch bill. He didn't answer. Then Leela took the phone. She didn't bother hiding her tone. Look, this is ridiculous. You're old. You don't need that much money. We'll pay you back eventually. Something in me went very still. Eventually, I repeated. That's what you call trust now, she scoffed. Don't be selfish, selfish. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because clarity finally arrived. I didn't raise my son to speak to his mother like this, I said. And I didn't save my whole life to fund someone else's comfort. Daniel grabbed the phone back. Mom, please, just unlock it. We'll talk when we get back. No, I said kindly. We're talking now. I told him everything then. About the paperwork, the new accounts, the lawyer appointment I had scheduled, about how every dollar could be traced and reclaimed legally. You used what I gave you, I said. So now I'm taking back what I never meant to lose. There was silence on the line, not the dramatic kind, the heavy kind. Finally, Daniel whispered, You're doing this to punish me. I shook my head. No, son. I'm doing this to survive. I ended the call before he could argue. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I realized something important. This wasn't revenge. It was the first boundary I'd ever drawn, and it had taken 72 years to learn how. But the real consequence, that would come later. That night, I didn't cry myself to sleep like I once would have. Instead, I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the steady ticking of the clock, thinking about how quietly betrayal enters a home. It never knocks. It never announces itself. It just sits down at your table and eats what you cooked. The next morning, I drove to the small legal office Ruth had recommended. It was nothing fancy, faded carpet, framed diplomas, a pot of coffee that had clearly been reheated too many times. But the woman who greeted me had kind eyes and a voice that carried authority without arrogance. Her name was Margaret Hale. She looked to be around my age, maybe a few years younger, and when she shook my hand, she held it just long enough to make me feel steady. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. I told her about Daniel, about my husband's death, about the years of sacrifice that built that savings account dollar by dollar. I told her how I gave my son access not because I had to, but because I trusted him. Margaret listened without interrupting, taking notes only when necessary. When I finished, she leaned back and sighed. "You're not the first mother this has happened to," she said gently, "and you won't be the last." That sentence hurt more than I expected. She explained my options clearly, not dramatically, not emotionally, just facts. She told me how to secure what remained, how to document everything, how to protect my home, my income, my future. "And if you choose to pursue repayment," she added, "you're well within your rights." I nodded. "I'm not trying to destroy my son." "I know," she said softly. "You're trying to teach him." On the drive home, my phone buzzed again and again. Missed calls, messages. I didn't read them. I already knew the tone, panic dressed up as apology. Instead, I stopped at the grocery store and bought ingredients for a stew my husband used to love. Cooking grounded me. It reminded me that I still had control over something in this world. That afternoon, I received a message from Leela's mother. Short, cold. This didn't have to get ugly. I stared at the screen for a long time. Neither did theft, I thought, but I didn't reply. Because silence, I was learning, can be far more powerful than defense. That evening, Daniel finally sent a voice message. His voice sounded tired, stripped of arrogance. Real. "Mom, I didn't think you'd react like this. I thought you'd understand." I closed my eyes. Understanding should never cost someone their safety. I saved the message, every word of it. And that's when I realized something else, something that made my chest ache. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the kind of man my son was becoming, and whether he was willing to find his way back. But before I could face that truth, another message arrived. One that changed everything. The message came from a number I didn't recognize, and for a moment, I almost ignored it. But something, call it instinct, call it a lifetime of listening to my gut, made me open it. It was a screenshot, a group chat. My name was at the top. I sat down slowly, the chair scraping against the kitchen floor as my eyes moved from line to line. There were jokes, careless, cruel ones, messages from Leela, from her mother, and from Daniel. "Daniel, she won't notice right away. She never checks her account. She owes us after everything we've put up with." My throat tightened, not because of the words, but because of how familiar that tone felt. I had heard it before, in smaller moments, in offhand comments I brushed aside. In silences I chose not to question. The sender's name was Claire, a cousin of Leela's, apparently. At the bottom of the message was a short note. "I don't know you, but this didn't sit right with me. I thought you should see what they were saying." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. I thanked Claire, briefly, honestly. Then I placed the phone face down on the table and folded my hands in my lap, just breathing. I thought of the bedtime stories I'd read Daniel, the scraped knees I'd kissed, the man I believed I had raised. and I felt grief, not anger. That evening, I finally responded to Daniel's messages. I didn't accuse. I didn't yell. I sent one sentence. "We need to talk when you come home." His reply came instantly. "I don't know what you think you saw, but this is being blown out of proportion." Of course it was. The next day, I met Margaret again. I showed her the screenshots. She didn't react emotionally, but her eyes hardened. "This changes things," she said. "Intent matters." I nodded. "I don't want revenge." She looked at me carefully. "Then decide what justice looks like to you." That question stayed with me all the way home. Justice. To some, it's punishment. To others, it's forgiveness. To me, in that moment, it was truth. I began organizing documents, statements, messages, records, not for court, but for clarity. I wanted Daniel to see himself clearly, without my voice softening the edges. That night, I slept with the folder beside my bed like a shield, because deep down, I knew this confrontation wouldn't be easy. Love makes us blind, but truth makes us brave. And when my son finally walked back through my door, he would no longer be facing the mother who cleaned up after him. He would be facing the woman he had underestimated. Daniel came home 4 days later. I knew the moment his car pulled into the driveway because my heart began to pound, not with fear, but with a strange mix of relief and resolve. I watched from the living room window as he sat behind the wheel longer than necessary. His shoulders slumped, the confidence he left with nowhere to be found. Leela wasn't with him. That, in itself, told me more than words ever could. When he finally knocked, I opened the door without hesitation. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I simply stepped aside and let him in, the same way I had when he was a teenager coming home past curfew. He looked around the house like it might disappear if he blinked. "You changed the locks," he said quietly. "I secured my life," I replied. We sat at the dining table, the one his father had built with his own hands. I placed the folder between us. Daniel stared at it like it might explode. "Before you say anything," I said, "I need you to listen." He nodded. I opened the folder and slid the screenshots across the table. The color drained from his face as he read them. Slowly, carefully, when he reached the message with his own words, his hands began to shake. "I didn't mean it like that," he whispered. "Then tell me how you meant it," I said. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he spoke, not defensively this time. I thought you'd never say no. You always made it work. I just assumed that I'd disappear quietly," I asked. He swallowed hard. "I didn't think it through." I leaned back in my chair. "Daniel, you're not a child anymore, and I am not your safety net." Tears filled his eyes then, real ones, not the kind used to escape consequences. "I messed up," he said. "I let them convince me it was harmless, that you'd be fine." I nodded. "I am fine because I stopped pretending." We talked for hours about entitlement, about marriage, about the dangerous comfort of believing someone else will always pay the price for your choices. I told him about the nights I skipped meals so he could eat, about the money I saved instead of living, about how being strong had slowly erased me. When I finished, he reached for my hand, but I didn't take it. I love you, I said, but love doesn't mean surrender. He understood then. I could see it. Before he left, I told him what would happen next. The repayment plan, the boundaries, the conditions under which trust might be rebuilt. He didn't argue. At the door, he turned back and said, "I'm scared I've lost you." I met his eyes. "No, you finally met me." And for the first time since this began, I felt something unexpected settle in my chest. Peace. The days after Daniel left were quieter than I expected, but not empty. They were full in a different way, like a room after furniture has been rearranged, and suddenly you can breathe again. He kept his word. The first repayment came through within a week. Not a large amount, but it wasn't the money that mattered, it was the intention behind it. Along with the transfer came a message. Short, careful. "I'm doing this right, even if it takes years." I read it twice, then set the phone down without replying. Growth needs silence sometimes. Too much reassurance can stunt it. Leela, however, did not stay silent. She showed up at my door unannounced one afternoon, heels sharp against the concrete, confidence stitched tightly into her posture. I could tell she had rehearsed what she wanted to say. "People like her always do. I think this has gone far enough," she said before I could invite her in. I didn't invite her in. "This was a family matter," she continued. "You humiliated us." I smiled gently. "No, dear, the truth did that." Her mouth tightened. "You turned Daniel against me." I shook my head. I stepped out of the way so he could see clearly. That's when the mask slipped. "You're old," she snapped. "What are you even saving for?" I looked at her for a long moment, not with anger, but with curiosity. Then I answered honestly. "For dignity," I said, "for choice, for the right to not be used." She laughed bitterly. "You'll regret this." I met her gaze calmly. "I already regret trusting people who didn't respect me. I won't add to that list." She left in a fury, but I felt no triumph watching her go. Just confirmation. That evening, Daniel called. His voice was steady but tired. "She's staying with her mother," he said, "for now." I didn't comment. This wasn't my marriage to fix. "What I did," he continued, "it cost me more than money." I closed my eyes. Some lessons do. Weeks passed. Then months. Daniel changed slowly, unevenly, but truly. He asked instead of assumed. He listened instead of defended. And for the first time in a long while, he thanked me not for my money, but for my honesty. One night, as I sat knitting by the window, I realized something important. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming myself. I had spent decades believing that being a good mother meant shrinking. That love required sacrifice without limit. But love, real love, also requires boundaries. I didn't lose my son. I found my voice. And in doing so, I taught him something no inheritance ever could. But the greatest lesson, that came quietly when I finally forgave myself. Forgiving myself took longer than forgiving my son. That surprised me. One evening, months after everything had settled, I sat alone on the porch as the sun dipped low, painting the sky the same soft orange my husband used to call a promise color. The house was quiet, but not in that hollow way it once was. This quiet felt earned. Daniel stopped by that night. No announcement, no urgency, just a knock and a tentative smile. He brought soup homemade, a little too salty, just like mine used to be when I was tired. We sat at the kitchen table, not across from each other this time, but side by side. "I'm still paying," he said, "and I will until it's done." "I know," I replied. He hesitated, then said something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. "I didn't just take your money," he said softly. "I took your sense of safety, and I'm sorry." That was the moment I knew he had truly understood. Leela never came back. Not to the house, not to the marriage. Some endings don't need a dramatic goodbye. They simply close the door and let silence finish the sentence. Daniel stayed, not because I demanded it, because he chose differently. As for me, I changed too. I traveled nothing extravagant, just places I'd once postponed. I joined a book club. I laughed louder. I stopped explaining myself to people who benefited from my silence. And sometimes, late at night, I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who believed love meant being endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, endlessly emptying herself. I wish I could sit beside her and whisper, "You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to protect yourself. You're allowed to matter." So, if you're listening to this and thinking it's too late, it's not. Age doesn't erase your worth. Kindness doesn't require self-betrayal. And boundaries don't destroy families. Sometimes they save them. I didn't get revenge. I got my life back. And that, my dear, was more than enough. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.